23 veterans' ranch burned by a cartel. Then a legendary Mustang horse appeared. An unbelievable ending. They burned his family's ranch to the ground. 3 generations of legacy, memories and survival reduced to ash. No one in town dared to speak. No law dared to stand with him. But then, something appeared. A black Mustang horse, dark as midnight and wild as a storm, emerged from the heart of the desert, carrying the breath of legend and the weight of destiny. And the cartel, thinking they had crushed the last flicker of resistance, never imagined that the ashes they left behind would become the very spark that sets a new fire blazing. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story grips you, don't forget to subscribe. Eli Walker stepped off the battered Greyhound bus with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a dog tag hanging from his neck. The early morning sky of Montana spread out in a swirl of pale blues and muted grays, giving the rugged landscape an almost dreamlike stillness. After 6 years in Afghanistan, he had grown used to the dry desert air, the echo of helicopter blades at dawn, and the numb feeling of being constantly on alert. Now stateside, he felt adrift in his own homeland. He glanced around the tiny bus station, little more than a tin-roofed shelter off a winding road that cut through pine forests and jagged rock formations. Beyond that, the valley floor stretched wide, blanketed by wisps of fog. Tucked amid those rolling hills and dense trees lay his family's ranch. A place that once represented belonging and safety for him now felt foreign, as though he were trespassing into someone else's memory. He took in a long breath, catching scents of wet earth and distant pine. The crispness of the air reminded him how different this was from the desert heat he had known for too long. In his free hand, he carried a worn wooden box containing letters his father had sent him. Some were never opened. He hadn't had the heart, or maybe the time, to read them all while overseas. The dog tag around his neck bore his name, Elijah Walker, and a faded line referencing his blood type. The metal clinked softly as he shifted his weight, the only real reminder of the uniform he'd recently shed. A local taxi driver, an older man with a slumped posture, agreed to drive him the rest of the way. The roads were narrow, hugging the edge of steep ravines. Dark pines soared overhead, and each hairpin turn revealed fleeting glimpses of the valley below, pale with morning mist. The driver barely spoke a word, aside from the occasional grunt or nod. Perhaps he recognized Eli's face. More likely, he recognized his surname. When the taxi finally pulled up to the main gate of the Walker ranch, Eli thanked the driver and stepped out onto a gravel path. A battered mailbox with chipped paint read Walker in letters that had faded over decades. The gate, made of peeling white wood, creaked on its hinges when Eli nudged it open. No one came out to greet him. No dog barked in welcome. It was quiet, too quiet for a place once filled with the bustle of ranch hands and braying horses. He made his way along a foot-worn path to the front porch, where the house stood in a state of unsettling stillness. It was a modest 2-story wooden home built by his grandfather, Silas Walker, a man who had once roamed these hills as both cowboy and soldier. The porch steps groaned beneath Eli's boot. For a long moment, he simply stared at the door, recalling the times he would step through it as a teenager, flush with energy from working in the fields. Now he felt more like an outsider than a returning son. A car door slamming behind him broke the silence. Eli turned to see Walter Brooks, an old family friend and the family's longtime attorney, stepping out of a dusty sedan. Walter was in his 60s, balding, and wore a threadbare blazer that seemed too formal for the countryside. His eyes held a mix of relief and sorrow as he approached. "Eli," Walter said quietly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." Eli nodded but said nothing. He dropped his duffel bag on the porch and offered a handshake. Walter took it, his grip unsteady, then motioned for Eli to sit on the porch bench. The wooden seats squeaked under their combined weight. "I would have come to meet you in town," Walter continued, "but I wasn't sure which bus you'd be on. I only got word that you'd arrived about an hour ago." He paused, letting his gaze drift across the property. "Your father's funeral was short and quiet. He died in what was described as an accident, faulty farm equipment. His official cause of death is listed that way. But you're not convinced," Eli said, finishing the lawyer's thought. He remembered some of his father's letters hinting at trouble. The older man simply shook his head. "It's complicated, son. The entire investigation was cursory. Some of the folks in town thought your father had been keeping to himself more than usual. They wrote it off as negligence. Eli exhaled, feeling as though a cold stone had settled in his chest. And no one questioned it, he said flatly. Walter shrugged, wearing the weary look of a man who had fought too many battles and lost most of them. Seems not. He pulled a thin envelope from his blazer's inside pocket. Here's a copy of the death certificate. There's little detail, just that it was a mechanical mishap, dated a few weeks ago. With trembling fingers, Eli took the envelope but didn't open it. He locked eyes on the front door of the house, noticing how the paint was cracking around the edges. I just need to see what's left, he murmured, and figure out what happened. Walter hesitated. I wish there was more I could do. Your father was a proud man. He didn't want to involve me in his affairs until it was too late. Eli rose, stepping onto the porch. Through the window, he could see dusty furniture and an empty living room, as if time had frozen on the day his father died. It's all right, Walter, he said quietly. I'll handle it. As he turned the knob and pushed open the front door, a stale draft greeted him. The interior smelled of old wood, faintly tinged with the mustiness of a space shut for too long. In the corners of the living room, cobwebs clung to the rafters like ghostly shrouds. A table lamp coated in a film of dust stood next to an armchair that still bore the indentation of his father's silhouette. He stepped further inside, feeling the house's silence press down on him like a tangible weight. This was the place where he had expected to find his father waiting with open arms after 6 long years. Now it seemed like a mausoleum. Walter lingered by the threshold. I'll let you settle. Ellie, if you need anything at all, you give me a call. He placed a note with his phone number on the table near the entrance. Eli nodded, scarcely managing a word of thanks. Once the attorney departed, the hush deepened, and the loneliness he'd felt overseas seemed almost comforting compared to this void of unanswered question. He peered out a side window. At that moment, he saw Mrs. Robertson from 2 farms over driving her truck past on the dirt road. Her gaze flickered in his direction but didn't linger. She simply kept driving. It felt like the entire town was avoiding him, or maybe the memory of his father. He set his duffel on the couch and walked through the house systematically. He checked the kitchen, plates still on the countertop, a box of cereals well past its expiration date, a handful of unopened bills scattered near the sink. Then, a wave of realism. Everything had been left exactly as it was the day John Walker died. Time had stopped here, leaving only echoes of a life once vibrant. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of aspens in the yard. Eli paused to listen. It carried a strange hush, neither welcoming nor threatening, just empty. He glanced at the dog tag in his hand, remembering the feel of desert grit and the stench of spent gunpowder. In some ways, Afghanistan had been simpler. Life or death, enemy or ally. Here, the lines blurred. He made his way up the creaking stairs to the 2nd floor. At the end of the hallway was his father's room. The door was ajar, revealing a neatly made bed and a wooden dresser with an old framed photo perched on top. Eli walked in, letting his gaze land on the picture. It was of him, his father and his grandfather Silas, standing under the ranch's sign years ago. He barely recognized the kid in it, brighter eyes, an easy smile, and no idea of the worlds he'd endure. Dad, he whispered into the silence. Why'd you have to leave me with all this? No answer came, only the rustle of the curtains in the breeze. In the following days, Eli tried to reacquaint himself with the ranch's routine. The old barn needed repairs, half the roof had caved in, and the stalls for horses were abandoned. There was no livestock left, just a few stray cats slinking around. Despite that, he found some solace in physical labor, patching up broken fences, hauling out debris from the barn, tinkering with the near-obsolete generator. The sweat and strain made him forget, at least briefly, the gnawing emptiness in the house. One afternoon, the sound of crunching gravel tore his attention away from mending fence posts. He stood up and saw an SUV gliding toward the port. Its paint was a glossy black, no license plates. A sinking feeling formed in his gut. By the time he walked over, a man in a crisp suit had stepped out. Eli Walker, the man said in a voice that was almost amiable. I've heard quite a bit about you. He extended a hand. Name's Ray Mercer. Eli didn't take the offered hand. He simply studied Mercer's meticulously styled hair, his polished shoes unsullied by the dust swirling around them. Something about the man screamed city slicker, Yet there was a quiet menace behind his polite smile. Mercer lifted a brow at the refusal. Then he chuckled softly and lowered his arm. "I represent Charles Easton," he said, "a man keen on developing this region for more profitable endeavors. He's a visionary. You see, he's heard about your ranch, how it's in a bit of disrepair. We'd like to make you an offer." "Not interested," Eli replied curtly, crossing his arms. Mercer still wore that same tranquil grin. "You haven't even heard how generous. You're standing on my property," Eli interrupted, "offering money for a place that's been in my family for 3 generations. I've come home to fix it, not sell it." His voice was tight, unyielding. Mercer nodded slowly, as though he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Of course, yes, I respect sentiment, but sometimes," he went on, "sentiment gets in the way of progress. Our vision is big, Mr. Walker, very big, and we'd prefer to have you on board." Rather than in the way, the last 3 words hung in the air like a subtle threat. Eli glared, heart pounding. "I think we're done." A glint of annoyance flashed in Mercer's eyes, but he maintained a facade of calm. "All right, I'll leave you my card, in case you change your mind." He slipped a crisp white card under a stone on the porch. Then, with the tip of his head, he turned and walked back to the SUV. Eli watched the vehicle disappear down the gravel road, raising a cloud of dust in its wake. His gut twisted in unease, and his mind flickered back to his father's accident. The tension felt more real now. He crouched to pick up the card. "RM consultant. No phone, no address." That night, he tossed and turned on a makeshift bed in the living room, the mattress dragging across the floor with each restless movement. Outside, the wind roiled as if echoing his turmoil. In the dim light of a single lamp, he rummaged through the last letter from his father, the one he hadn't read yet. John Walker's words were hastily scribbled, referencing some pressure from big men in black SUVs, threats about land rights. The letter ended abruptly. "I won't be bullied, son. But if anything happens, know that I..." He stared at the unfinished sentence. None of this looked good. In the morning, he hopped into the old pickup that had belonged to his father. It'd grown to life after a few attempts, sputtering along the dusty trail toward town. The single grocery store and lone gas station made up the commercial hub. People averted their gazes when he walked in, as if they knew something they didn't dare share. Walter Brooks was at his office, reorganizing files into boxes. "Walter," Eli said quietly. "A man named Mercer came by. Said he's representing Charles Easton. They want the ranch." Walter sighed. "I was afraid of that. Your father had been pressured too. Easton has money, connections. He's not just a local developer. People fear him." He rummaged through a file box and handed Eli some paperwork. "See here, your father was trying to reaffirm the property lines. Easton contested them, claiming part of your land extends into his licensed territory. It's a ploy, but it gave them leverage. Leverage to do what?" Eli asked, feeling a flare of anger. "Whatever they want," Walter replied matter-of-factly. "They're known to strong-arm or buy out everyone who stands in their way." Over the next days, warnings piled up. Ben Carter, an old friend, showed up at the ranch gate, refusing to step inside. "Look, I don't want trouble, Ellie," he muttered. "Folks are saying Easton's men are planning something big, something that will change everything. I heard your father was a stumbling block to them." "A stumbling block or an enemy?" Eli asked. Ben didn't answer directly. One late evening, while fixing the barn door, Eli noticed footprints in the dirt, heavy boots, leading to the storage shed. He crept inside, heart thundering, but found no one. Nothing was stolen, but the sense of intrusion was palpable. It felt like eyes were on him day and night. Still, he refused to cave. He wrote letters to the Department of Natural Resources, demanding they confirm his rightful ownership of the land. He half expected no response, but doing nothing wasn't an option. Throughout, the silence around him became an oppressive force. The ranch, once alive with animals and workers, was now just a hollow shadow of itself, yet it remained, in his eyes, the only tangible link to his father and grandfather's legacy. Days turned into a blur of sawdust and sweat as he repaired the main house's roof, replaced broken windows, and tried to restore some semblance of life to the property. By night, he pored over legal documents and stared at his father's letters, wondering if John had known how dangerous these men truly were. A swirling sense of dread began to coil in Eli's gut. He told himself it was simply the stress. Yet from a vantage point on the porch, Each dusk he watched headlights slow as they passed, as if scoping out the ranch. The threat felt real, tangible. If they did something to Dad, he whispered to the darkness one night, they'll damn sure try to do the same to me. But he remembered his father's final messages, how the old man had refused to bow to intimidation. That inheritance, more than the ranch itself, steeled Eli's resolve. He wouldn't sell, he wouldn't run, not after losing so much time away in Afghanistan, not after failing to be here when his father needed him most. This was his land, his blood. If there was going to be a fight, let it happen here. The night it all came crashing down, Eli had passed out on the couch, exhausted from a day's labor repairing the barn's sagging beam. A half-eaten can of beans sat on the coffee table. He dozed off sometime after midnight, lulled by the hum of the generator. Then the sharp crack of glass shattered his haze. He bolted upright, the metallic taste of adrenaline flooding his mouth. Smoke drifted across the living room ceiling. The acrid stench of gasoline assaulted his nostrils. Disoriented, he stumbled toward the window and saw flickers of orange glare outside. The storage shed was ablaze, flames dancing like wild devils in the darkness. His instincts kicked in. Grabbing a blanket from the couch, he sprinted out the front door. The moment he crossed the threshold, he heard something smash behind him. Another bottle, perhaps a Molotov, igniting along the porch siding. Now the house was on fire too. Heat blasted him in the face, forcing him to shield his eyes. He dashed to the side of the house, searching for the garden hose. The water pressure was pitiful, trickling out feebly, useless. The fire hissed, devouring dry wood, fueling columns of black smoke that rose into the starless sky. Eli coughed, eyes stinging from the fumes. Yet he raced back inside to grab whatever he could, if he could at least save essential documents, or the letters from his father. But a beam collapsed in the hallway with a roar, spewing spark. A piece of it slammed down onto his forearm, searing through his shirt. He bit back a scream and heaved the debris off, stumbling in pain. The heat was overwhelming now, the house turning into a furnace. He forced himself down a side corridor. Flames licked at the wall. The old wallpaper curled away as if in agony. In the living room, smoke churned thickly, obscuring the furniture. Eli realized he was trapped. He flung the blanket around himself and lunged through the front door once more, nearly tripping on the threshold. The entire porch was ablaze now. His elbow clipped a column, which swayed precariously, then broke in half with a splintering crash. Finally outside, he gasped in ragged breaths, stumbling onto the gravel yard. He glimpsed headlights flaring in the distance, but they vanished quickly. Whether it was an illusion or the arsonists watching from afar, he couldn't tell. Any attempt to chase them was moot. The immediate danger was right here. His home, his father's home, was burning to the ground before his eyes. Sirens came too late, far too late. In a rural area like this, the nearest fire department was miles away. By the time a lone fire engine arrived, the structure was almost fully consumed. Flames leapt into the sky, and the thick scent of burning wood and old memories choked the night air. Eli stood there, one hand pressed to the burn on his arm, the other clenched in helpless fury. Not long after, the local sheriff's cruiser rolled in. Two deputies jumped out, shining flashlights across the scorched remains. At their helm was Sheriff Will Givens, who looked pained yet strangely resigned. Givens asked question after question, but his tone wasn't exactly comforting. It felt more accusatory. "Where were you tonight, Mr. Walker?" "I was asleep in the house," Eli said, voice raw from the smoke. Any idea how this might have started? "It was arson, some sort of firebomb. Didn't you see?" A deputy cut him off. "We got a tip there might be an insurance scam going on here." Eli's eyes widened. "Insurance scam?" The sheriff exhaled, meeting Eli's gaze briefly. "We got a call from an anonymous source, about an hour ago. They said you planned to torch the place for the payout." Eli was too stunned to speak. The emptiness in his chest was replaced by a rising wave of rage. "That's insane. You can see for yourself. This place belonged to my family. There's no big policy." But the deputy had already begun snapping photos with a phone. Another rummaged around, as though searching for incriminating evidence. "We'll have to ask you to come in for questioning, Mr. Walker." The sheriff's. Eli stared blankly at the inferno, the heat stinging the side of his face. "You think I burned my own house down?" He nearly laughed, but it came out as a pained cough. "This is all I have left." "Ha!" Givens shrugged, almost apologetically. We'll sort it out. But rumors can be powerful, and we have to follow up on them. And so they took him away. Smoke still curled from the remains of the ranch. As the cruiser pulled onto the main road, Eli sat in the back seat, nausea gripping his stomach. He recalled the quick glimpse of headlights earlier, the smell of gas bombs. The people who had done this were probably long gone, leaving him to take the fall. After hours of questioning at the station, where an officer typed up a meager report, Eli was released without formal charges, but told to remain in the county. The local news, however, had run with the rumor. By dawn, half the town believed the version of events that pinned Eli as a desperate ex-soldier, sabotaging his own property for some insurance claim. It was so perfectly orchestrated, so swift, that it left him breathless. He went to Walter Brooks for help. The lawyer tried to intervene, made calls, drafted letters, but that very same day, Walter was placed on indefinite leave from his firm, effectively muzzling him. And just like that, the few people who might have stood up for Eli were silenced, forced away, or too scared to speak. His next stop was Ben Carter's place, hoping an old friend would at least give him a couch for the night. But Ben wouldn't open the door fully. He looked terrified. "I've got my family." "Eli," he muttered through the crack, "I can't risk them. I'm sorry." After that final blow, Eli drifted along back roads, cradling his injured arm. He ended up in a derelict old grain shed on the outskirts, collapsing onto a mattress of moldy hay. It reeked of dust and rot, but it kept the wind at bay. For days, he nursed his burn wounds with a meager first aid kit and ate from cans he scavenged at a deserted supply trailer. Late one evening, he found himself gazing across the horizon where the ranch had stood. Nothing remained but blackened supports and rubble. The intangible weight of that devastation pressed on his chest. He closed his eyes, hearing the memory of his grandfather's voice. "When you have nothing left to lose, listen for the sound of hoofbeats in the distance." As a child, he'd never understood those words, chalking them up to the ramblings of an old cowboy. Now in this state, broken, alone, scorned by the very town he grew up in, he felt those words resonate in the marrow of his bones, and so a seed of bitterness and resolve took root. He might be battered and homeless, but he wasn't dead. Something in him refused to let this be the end. The open skies of Montana had once sheltered his family. Perhaps, somewhere out there in the desolate plains and hidden trails, he would find the will and the means to fight back. His father's final letter echoed in his mind, half-read but searing. "I won't be bullied." The old man might have lost that battle, but maybe Eli could still carry on the war somehow. With that grim thought, he lay back against a broken bale of hay, letting exhaustion overtake him. As he drifted into sleep, the faint howling of the wind through the shed sounded almost like a distant neigh, a phantom call across the night. It whispered of vengeance and salvation yet to come. Eli Walker trudged along the back road, one slow step at a time, clutching his bandaged arm against the autumn chill. The worn fabric of his jacket had a gaping tear across the right shoulder, another reminder of the night his life was reduced to ashes. Not a single friend in town would offer him more than a few moments of wary conversation, let alone a place to sleep. The townspeople all pretended not to see him whenever he passed by, despite the pity that sometimes flickered in their eye. When he couldn't bear the accusing stares and the whispers about that soldier who burned his own ranch, he drifted beyond the outskirts, setting up a ramshackle shelter made of old tarps, broken pallets, and scavenged scrap wood. The lean-to offered meager protection from the elements, but it was something. Each evening he'd light a small campfire out front, the flames casting dancing shadows on the rocky ground. In the distance he could hear the howls of coyotes echoing off the moonlit hills. It reminded him of the nights in Afghanistan, when jackals and distant artillery shaped his sense of solitude. Eli scavenged for food however he could. Sometimes he found canned goods in abandoned hunting cabins, or traded odd jobs for a box of stale crackers. A middle-aged man at a roadside service station once slipped him a few cans of corn. Each time he opened one over the campfire, a pang of bitterness twisted inside him. He'd gone from the proud inheritor of a 3-generation ranch to a vagabond living off charity and scraps. But he told himself that bitterness was better than defeat. It kept him alive, fueling the flame of defiance against the injustice he had suffered. A few miles away, near a shallow creek, lived George Two Moons, a stoic, elderly man of Blackfoot descent. George was one of the very few people in the region who didn't avoid Eli. On a particularly cold dusk, the old man showed up unannounced and tossed a small jug of water to Eli, who caught it with his good arm. "You're not safe here, soldier," George said in a gravelly tone. His weathered face had the sort of lines that hinted at a life of hard lessons. "You'd best keep a wide berth of Raven Rock. It's said that place holds on to lost souls like a snare." Eli nodded, too tired to argue. "I appreciate the water." George simply gave him a solemn nod, then ambled off with a walking stick in hand, disappearing between the scrub pines. Eli watched him go, a strange comfort flaring in his chest. At least not everyone had turned their back on him. Another time, Eli limped into the small grocery store on the far side of town, hoping to buy some discount bread with his last few dollars. The teenage clerk, a girl of about 16, rang up his purchase in silence, though her eyes flicked nervously to her manager across the aisle. When he picked up his bag and turned to leave, he realized the weight was off. Opening it outside, he found an extra loaf of bread and an old roll of medical gauze hidden beneath the purchased items. Despite everything, a faint smile touched his face. Yet, as the days blurred together, his nights became far more vivid. Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamed. And these dreams were not quiet or comforting. They were fierce, haunting visions that began with the figure of his father, John Walker, standing on a windswept mountainside. His father's hands were bloody, his eyes vacant, as though he saw something terrifying beyond the horizon. He never spoke, he simply stared, frozen in a silent mourning. Then the dream would shift, and Eli would see his grandfather, Silas, atop a massive black horse galloping through a field drenched in crimson. Silas raised a hand, beckoning Eli to follow. In the dream, Silas's voice would roll like distant thunder. "Head to the place where the sun runs dry." "Boy, our road ain't done yet." Eli woke each time drenched in sweat, a dull ache throbbing in his burned arm. These nightmares lingered well into daylight, wrapping around his thoughts like barbed wire. He couldn't shake the sense that they were more than random illusion. Perhaps the trauma of the ranch's destruction mingled with childhood memories of his grandfather's frontier tales. One recurring element in these dreams was especially vivid. A colossal Mustang, black as midnight, its coat shimmering like obsidian. The beast stood in swirling desert dust, eyes glowing amber, as though peering directly into Eli's soul. It radiated a silent power that was both feral and regal, a living symbol of the land's untamed spirit. Each time the Mustang appeared, Eli felt a pull in his chest, like something in him recognized the horse, or maybe belonged to it. Unable to shake the imagery, he found himself drawing the silhouette of that black Mustang in the dirt outside his makeshift shelter. He carved its shape onto chunks of driftwood or the trunks of gnarled trees, as if trying to invoke it somehow. Those sketches calmed him in ways he couldn't explain, offering a thin thread of hope. Because beyond the bitterness and the heartbreak, a part of him desperately needed to believe there was still a purpose out here in these wide open spaces. Whenever a coyote howled too close or the wind rattled his lean-to in the dead of night, he imagined the Mustang's eyes cutting through the darkness, guiding him to a fate beyond his self-imposed exile. The day would come, he told himself, when he'd face the cartel that took everything. But first, he had to survive. He had to find whatever it was his dreams demanded he search for. A crisp dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows against the dusty foothills. Eli strapped on a tattered backpack, checked the small revolver that once belonged to his grandfather, and filled a canteen with water from the creek. He had no clear plan, only the unshakable feeling that he needed to move. Staying near town made him an easy target for prying eyes, and the visions urging him deeper into the wilderness had grown so insistent that he could no longer ignore them. He decided to follow his instinct. The recollection of Silas's dream voice, "Go where the sun runs dry," guided him like a half-buried compass. Locals had often whispered about Raven Rock, a place some said was cursed or at least studded with old legend. Now more than ever, that name echoed in Eli's mind, a hint at the forbidden desert that might hold the key to something bigger than himself. With a final glance at his makeshift camp, he headed west, cutting across scraggly fields and weaving through stunted pine grove. The land gradually shifted from the greenish-brown of farmland to a harsh, rocky terrain scattered with sagebrush. An hour passed, 2 hours. The sun climbed higher, slicing away the morning chill. Somewhere around mid-morning, he spotted a lone figure standing by a spindly juniper tree. As Eli drew closer, he realized it was Sky Alder, the indigenous tracker he'd occasionally heard about from old rumors in town. People said Sky had a knack for finding lost animals, or even lost people. In the harshest landscapes, Sky wore a sun-bleached hat and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. He seemed to be examining footprints in the dusty ground when he turned, noticing Eli's approach. "You're the Walker boy," Sky said in a voice neither friendly nor hostile. Didn't expect to see you heading this way." His gaze flicked to Eli's bandaged arm. "I have nowhere else to go," Eli replied, swallowing. "And I keep hearing that Raven Rock calls to the lost." Sky's lips curved into something like a half-smile, but his eyes remained sharp. "You know the story, then?" "Not really," Eli admitted, adjusting his backpack strap. "I just know I've been having dreams that won't let me rest." Sky exhaled slowly, as if weighing what to say. "That place, some call it the crack on the Earth's spine. It can reveal things you don't want to face. If you're not ready, it'll tear you apart." A shiver crawled up Eli's spine. "I'm done hiding," he said simply. "I don't have anything left." Sky studied him in silence. Then the tracker pointed his rifle at the ground, leaning on it like a staff. "Keep going north through that ravine until the ground turns red. You'll know when you're close to Raven Rock, but I'm warning you. Most men who head that way never come back the same. If they come back at all, thank you," Eli said. He gave a polite nod, not sure if it was courtesy or resignation. Sky dipped his head in a gesture of acknowledgement, then slung his rifle and strode away. Eli watched until the tracker's figure disappeared among the rocks. Part of him wanted to ask Sky for more guidance, but something told him he had to walk this path alone. The wind picked up, blowing dust into the air. He tucked his head down and continued onward. As the hours passed, the landscape transformed dramatically. Stunted pines gave way to squat desert shrubs and cracked red earth. Occasional gusts of wind swirled dust devils across the open flatlands. The heat pressed down, beads of sweat forming on Eli's brow. He took measured sips from his canteen, aware that water would be scarce beyond this point. Around mid-afternoon, he reached what looked like a vast natural basin, a sunken valley with towering rock formations jutting up like the spines of a massive beast. The place felt deserted, yet oddly alive with an unseen energy. Each footstep echoed dully, as though the ground were hollow underneath. Eli swore he could hear faint murmurs riding the wind, like voices just out of range. Rock columns shaped by centuries of erosion rose on either side, some carved with faded images. He halted by one that depicted a series of stylized horses, their limbs elongated, and manes flowing backward as if to show speed. Another column bore black scorch marks, as though a fire had raged here long ago. The sight made his heartbeat quicken. No rational explanation came to mind. He decided the best course was to keep moving, though an inexplicable tension filled the air. At last, he stumbled upon a place that seemed to defy logic. A dried salt lake, shimmering bright white under the fierce sun. The cracked surface stretched out in a broken mosaic, each fragment of salt resembling a shard of bone. At the center stood a toppled stone pillar, half buried in the ground. Intrigued, Eli approached. In the shadow beneath the pillar, faint etchings were visible, letters and symbols so worn that he had to crouch and run his fingers across them to read. "Spirit echoes," he whispered, sounding out the ancient script. Below that, in what might have been a more modern hand, someone had scrawled, "The horse never dies. It simply leaves the living world until we need it again." His mind flashed to the black Mustang in his dreams, the silent guardian that haunted his sleep. A cold thrill coursed through his veins. Here in this cracked, colorless wasteland, he sensed the edges of the supernatural. It felt like he stood on the threshold between reality and myth. Glancing around, he noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no rustle of small creatures. Even the wind seemed hesitant to disturb the eerie calm. Still, dusk approached, painting the sky with oranges and purples. He set up a small camp near the fallen pillar, laying out a thin bedroll. Thirst gnawed at him, and he rationed the last of his water. Night here would likely be cold, but safer, he reasoned, than trying to wander in the darkness. Besides, He had come this far following the intangible pull of his dreams. If there was any place to find answers, maybe it was right here, at the mouth of this dried lake, a silent cemetery of lost waters and older tale. As darkness closed in, he reclined against a slab of rock and gazed up at the sky. Stars blazed overhead in a dazzling array, unimpeded by city lights. His mind drifted to the memory of his father, the ranch in flames, and the cartel that now held everything he once cared about. A bitterness welled inside him, but it was tempered by a strange glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the legends about the desert horse had some truth. Perhaps this place of lifeless salt held a seed of rebirth. He fell asleep with one hand resting on the butt of his grandfather's revolver and the other on the surface of the parched ground. The dryness against his palm made him shiver. Or maybe it was anticipation, an intuitive sense that the land itself might respond to him, as if it had its own conscience. Before drifting fully into slumber, he murmured, "If you're out there, show me," a silent prayer to the emptiness around him. Dawn broke over the rim of the basin in a muted haze. The sun's first rays barely penetrated the rising fog that clung to the lake bed, giving the entire place the appearance of an otherworldly stage. Eli stirred from restless sleep, blinking away the grit in his eye. He felt the cold dryness in his throat and winced. He'd gone too long without proper water. As he pushed himself upright, he paused. A faint echo reached his ears, a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that reverberated like a heartbeat in the silent morning. He stood, scanning the horizon, his breath caught in his chest as he spotted a shape moving along the ridge of a low dune to the east. At first it seemed like a shadow, then it materialized, a massive, sleek figure stepping carefully on the salt-cracked ground. The horse's coat was black, blacker than midnight itself, and a dusting of sandy silt gave it a faint, shimmering halo in the growing light. Its mane hung thick, and as it flicked its head, the strands caught the pale sun, glinting like silk. Eli felt a jolt of recognition so strong that his pulse stumbled. This was the horse from his dreams, the legendary Mustang with amber eyes that peered straight into him. He froze, unsure whether to approach or remain still. The Mustang advanced a few steps, nostrils flaring, sending out a soft snort. They stood there in a stalemate, two silhouettes in a row. The horse's mane was black. Its mane was black. Its mane was black. Its mane was black. Eli let the tension settle. The Mustang circled slowly, each hoof crunching on the salt crust. Its breath steamed in the cool morning air. He took note of its raw power, muscles rippling beneath the glossy hide, and realized how easily it could trample him if it chose. For a long moment, neither creature nor man moved, locked in a cautious dance. Eli's mouth was parched, and he nearly coughed when he spoke. "Easy, big guy. I'm not here to hurt you." The Mustang flicked its ears back, as though registering the tone of his voice. He took a tentative step forward. Instantly, the horse reared, kicking up a cloud of fine salt dust that stung his eyes. Startled, he staggered backward and nearly lost his footing. His heart hammered, even as it reared. Though the Mustang didn't charge him, it seemed more a warning than an assault. His mind raced. In Afghanistan, he'd learned the importance of reading body language, be it from fellow soldiers, local allies, or even stray dogs. Aggression could be caution. He remembered that. Slowly, he reached for the knife at his belt, not to threaten but to demonstrate vulnerability. He sliced the sleeve of his tattered shirt down to the elbow, and let the cloth drop. He took another step away from the cloth, palms raised. "All right," he breathed, voice steady despite his adrenaline. "I'm unarmed now." The Mustang blew out a short breath, eyes still gleaming with suspicion. Then, with a snort, it turned and bounded up the dune. Eli watched it vanish in a swirl of sand and morning fog. Gone, yet he was certain it hadn't run far. Exhaustion weighed on him, and his thirst roared to life. He spent the rest of the day gathering whatever meager shelter he could manage under a craggy rock overhang. At one point he wandered around the lake bed, searching for any sign of moisture but found nothing but more cracked salt. That was when he almost tripped over a rusted steel trap lying half buried in the dirt. Eli knelt, prying the old jaws open with a piece of rock. He could guess that local hunters might have set it for coyotes or smaller game, though it looked abandoned. A sudden yelp of pain nearby made him flinch. He followed the sound to discover another metal trap, this one very much active, and inside was a young wolf, its paw clamped in the jaws. The creature whined, eyes wide with terror. It tried to snap at him as he inched closer, but it was too immobilized to fight effectively. Eli, ignoring the danger, jammed a rock into the trap's mechanism and wrenched it open. The wolf pulled free with a ragged whimper, limping off a few paces before turning to stare at him, muzzle trembling. "Go," Eli said gently. "Get the hell out of here." The wolf, panting, eventually ran off, leaving small crimson paw prints fading into the salt. In freeing it, he'd sliced his own hand on a sharp edge of metal. Blood trickled down his wrist, and the sting set his nerves on edge. He wrapped the wound with a strip of bandana, wincing as he tightened the makeshift dressing. An hour later, as dusk approached again, he found himself leaning against a rock wall, the ache in his hand constant. He glanced up and nearly jumped out of his skin. The black Mustang was watching him from no more than 10 yards away. It stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly down, ears pricked in his direction. Eli's heart thudded. He slowly lowered his arms to his sides. "You again?" he murmured. The horse breathed heavily, taking a single step forward. Eli glanced at the blood staining his bandage. Could it smell the iron tang? The Mustang moved closer, lowering its head toward his injured hand. He swallowed. "Careful," he said softly, but he made no attempt to flee or shoo it away. The animal's breath fanned across his wrist, stirring dust motes in the fading light. Eli's nerves were electrified. The sheer power of the creature was overwhelming. Suddenly, the Mustang pressed its muzzle to his forearm, as if trying to understand him. Something akin to a hush fell over the salt basin. No wind, no birds, just the quiet communion of man and horse. Hesitantly, Eli raised his uninjured hand and gently touched the Mustang's neck, fingers sinking into the thick, dusty mane. He half expected it to flinch or bolt, but it stood tense yet unresisting. The connection felt surreal, as though their meeting existed in a realm beyond mere chance. For a long time, they remained like that, silhouetted against the twilight sky, until the last of the daylight dipped below the horizon. "Thank you," Eli whispered, though he wasn't sure why he said it. Perhaps for not trampling him, or for acknowledging his presence. Deep down, he sensed this was more than a random encounter. The unspoken energy between them reminded him of his grandfather's stories about certain horses that chose their riders, not the other way around. Over the next hour, the Mustang retreated a few steps whenever he moved too quickly, but it didn't disappear entirely. It hovered at the edge of his makeshift camp while Eli built a small fire. The flames flickered, painting the horse's coat with gold highlight. Eli tied another scrap of cloth around his hand, mindful that infection could be a real threat. He hadn't come prepared for long stays in the desert, but something told him he might be here for a while. At some point, he felt compelled to speak, the stillness fraying his nerve. "You probably don't understand a damn word I'm saying, right?" He glanced at the Mustang, which flicked an ear, still watching. "Well," he continued, "I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing out here either, but I lost everything. My home, my father, maybe even my pride." He exhaled shakily. "I can't move on without doing something to set it right, and that something might mean blood." The horse stomped a hoof softly, producing a dull echo. Eli took it as permission to go on. "The men who took my ranch are vicious. They burned my life down in a single night. I need to get it back, or at least make them pay for what they did." Silence stretched out. The horse's gaze remained unflinching. Eli's voice grew hoarse with emotion. "I'm not much on my own, but if you stick around, maybe we can change that." Then, in a gesture that felt half crazy, half sacred, he placed his palm over his heart. "I have no home, no family, no reason to keep living, except one, to answer blood with blood." His tone faltered. "If you come with me, we'll make them pay." In the last rays of twilight, the Mustang held his gaze for a long, pulsing moment. Then it dipped its head a fraction. Eli's breath caught. It wasn't exactly a nod, but it felt like an acknowledgement. Together, they stood in that threshold between day and night, forging a silent pact. The wind picked up across the salt flats, swirling small eddies of dust around their feet. Eli exhaled, a tremor running through him. Somehow he knew that from this moment on, there was no turning back. He wrapped himself in his jacket and settled against a rock, staring at the horse. Maybe, as it stood watch, the black silhouette pressed against the lavender sky was a living emblem of untamed destiny. By the time true darkness blanketed the desert, only the faint glow of his dying campfire remained. Yet Eli no longer felt quite so alone. Within that hush, the burning anger in his chest began to transform into a sharper purpose. He thought of the ranch, of the father whose final words were left unfinished. He imagined the cartel's smug sneers, how they had orchestrated his ruin. A new voice seemed to echo in his head, one that belonged to both himself and the Mustang at his side. They think we're finished. They're wrong. When the first star flickered overhead, the Mustang trotted closer, its powerful form settling beside him in a half-circle. As though standing guard, Eli gazed into the infinite expanse of sky. He pictured the flames that had consumed his home. Only now, in his mind, they blazed with a different purpose. Those same flames that had destroyed him would be the fire that lit his vengeance. Night draped the rugged landscape in shadows as Eli Walker guided the black Mustang along a winding dirt trail. The moon was a hazy crescent above, offering just enough light to keep from stumbling over rocks and deadfall. Weeks had passed since he'd left the outskirts of town in search of answers. Now he was returning to the heart of what once was his family ranch, burned, condemned, and heavily watched by cartel enforcers. Yet the darkness was on his side. Patrolling thugs rarely expected a silent rider, slipping through the ravaged fields. Mustang's hooves made surprisingly little noise, as if even the horse understood the need for stealth. Its ears swiveled at the faintest sound, a rustle of wind across the skeletal remains of an old barn. The distant scrape of metal where someone had set up floodlights to keep intruders away. Eli crouched low, patting the Mustang's neck in silent gratitude. Something in the horse's presence emboldened him. He knew well enough that going back here was a risk. If the cartel men discovered him, he could end up in a shallow grave. But there were loose ends he needed to tie up, fragments of the past that might hold clues about his father's final days. The ranch looked even more haunting under moonlight. Bare timbers jutted skyward like the charred ribs of a long-dead beast. A few motion sensor lights glowed in the distance, affixed to makeshift scaffolding. The cartel had erected to keep looters or curious locals at bay. Eli halted Mustang by the scorched remains of an old willow tree that had once shaded the front yard. He dismounted carefully, every muscle tensed for danger, then gave Mustang a soft signal to stay put. The horse bowed its head, snorting quietly, and Eli felt a pang of warmth. Even in the midst of all this ruin, he wasn't alone. He crept toward the burned-out shell of the farmhouse, guided by memory rather than sight. Splintered floorboards groaned underfoot. It reeked of soot and stale ash, the acrid tang of melted plastics and chemicals clinging to every surface. Before him rose the blackened skeleton of the living room, no longer recognizable as the place he'd grown up in. Eli resisted the urge to dwell on the heartbreak. Instead, he focused on searching for anything that might have survived the flame. It didn't take long to find the old cast-iron stove in what used to be the kitchen corner. He remembered how his father, John Walker, would hide important papers in odd places, under loose floorboards, behind wall panels, or in the stove's ash drawer. Eli knelt and pried open the warped metal door, only to see a nest of cinders sifting through them. His fingers brushed something metallic, a half-melted tin box. Carefully, he retrieved it, ignoring the scrape of jagged edges. The lid was fused shut, but with enough gentle prying, he managed to open it. Inside was a partially burned letter. Moonlight revealed smeared handwriting. "If I don't get this to Eli in time." The next lines were scorched beyond recognition, yet those few words were enough to hammer home the truth. His father had tried to warn him. The letter, now broken and half-empty, still carried that desperate plea. Eli's throat tightened. He tucked the tin back under his jacket. Maybe an expert could salvage more from it. Anxious footfalls outside made him freeze. Through a gap in the ruined wall, he spotted two men in dark jackets scanning the area with flashlights. One cursed under his breath about babysitting a pile of ashes. Eli pressed himself against the blackened board. Holding his breath, he waited until their voices faded, then eased away from the stove and slipped through the collapsed hallway. He dared not linger. He had what he needed for now. Mustang waited exactly where he'd left it. Eli glanced at the horizon, making sure no silhouettes moved. Once confident, he swung onto the horse's back. With a gentle nudge, They skirted behind a ruined shed and cantered off into the safety of night. Neither man nor horse looked back at the farmland's skeletal remains. The past was gone, but it still called to him, urging him to uncover the cartel's deceptions and claim some form of justice. Eli knew only one man who might help interpret the partial letter, or shed more light on John Walker's final days. Walter Brooks, the retired lawyer who had once been a steadfast family ally. Word was that Brooks had retreated to a small cabin high in the mountains after being ousted from his law firm. So it was there Eli directed Mustang, forging a path along a steep forest trail. The wind smelled of pine and coming snow. Around midnight he arrived at a modest log cabin lit by a single lantern glowing through the window. Brooks himself emerged cautiously when Eli knocked. The older man looked thinner than before, his eyes sunken with worry. Still, a flicker of relief crossed his face at the sight of Eli. "Son," Brooks said in a subdued tone, "I feared you might have been, well, you know how these people operate." "I'm still here," Eli answered. "But my father isn't," and he handed over the half-burned tin. "Found this at the ranch. There's not much left, but I need to know what it might have said." Brooks peered inside, lips tightening. John was on the verge of contacting the FBI. He believed he had evidence of fraudulent land deeds and chemical trafficking. Something big. He hinted Easton's men were behind it all. "I tried to help him, but I was too late." He took a shaky breath, then crossed the cabin to retrieve a small plastic bag from a drawer. Inside was a battered USB drive. Brooks held it out with trembling fingers. "Your father gave me this just before he died. Said if anything happened to him, you needed to hear what's on." Eli's heart thudded. "You listened to it?" Brooks nodded. "Only parts. It's a voice recording, John speaking about what he'd discovered. Something about Easton murdering a friend of his for refusing to sell. Then the phone records the suspicious shipments. He sounds scared but determined." Eli clenched his jaw. The question pounded in his mind. Had his father been murdered before the fire ever started? He thanked Brooks, stashed the USB carefully in his coat, then asked if the older man would testify. Brooks looked at him, sorrow etched into his face. "You don't understand, Ellie. They forced me out of my job. They can make witnesses disappear. I barely have the courage to stay alive, let alone stand up in court. For what it's worth, I'm on your side." Eli sighed, understanding the danger. "All right, at least I have this." He tapped the USB. "I'll figure out the rest." Brooks wished him luck, pressing a warm thermos of coffee into his hands before seeing him off into the cold. Eli rode away, the knowledge that he was heading into a deeper fight settling heavily on him. By dawn, he'd find a place to listen to John Walker's final confession. Morning found Eli crouched by a gurgling stream in a remote patch of high country. Despite the crisp air, he felt sweat beading under his collar. With a small battery-powered device, a relic from his father's home office, he managed to access the USB recording. John's voice crackled with static. "If I disappear, don't believe a damn thing they say. Easton promised a partnership, then took everything. Said I had to sign over the ranch, or face dire consequences. My friend Tommy refused, so they made an example of him. Drove him off the road, covered it up as a drunk accident. Now they're forging new deeds. Chemical shipments come in labeled as farm supplies, but I recognize the markings. Hazardous stuff. The kind that kills with slow exposure. If they find out I know, I'm done for." John hesitated, voice trembling. "Eli, if you hear this, I'm sorry I couldn't protect the ranch. I tried. I hope you never have to see the worst in people. But if you do, fight back. Don't let them take what's ours." Silence followed, except for a faint scuffle. Perhaps John setting down the recorder. Eli pressed stop. He sat there on a fallen log, shoulders trembling. So it was official. His father had uncovered something that spelled the end. The proof was damning, but mere proof wouldn't be enough to topple a cartel that owned entire swathes of local government. He squared his jaw and looked over at Mustang, which grazed lazily on a patch of grass near the water. "We're seeing this through," he murmured, as if the horse could understand. Perhaps it did. The flames that once burned him out of his home now raged in his heart, forging a steel determination. He had no illusions about the danger, but illusions wouldn't serve him. Only cold resolve would. The last piece of the puzzle for that night was Mary Ann, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Walker family for decades. According to hearsay, she'd vanished from town soon after John's death, relocating to her sister's place in a quiet valley. Locals whispered that Mary Ann was terrified of crossing Easton. Yet if anyone knew the final days of John Walker, it would be her. Eli found her in a humble single-story cottage, framed by aspens turning gold in the autumn. She opened the door only after he stated who he was. Even then, her eyes flickered with fear behind thick glasses. "Mrs. Mary Ann," he began gently, "I have to know what happened to my father." She swallowed, stepping aside to let him in. The living room was cramped yet cozy, crocheted blankets draped over threadbare furniture. She offered him tea, hands trembling as she poured. After a tense silence, she finally spoke. "I was there the day that man came. Called himself a pesticide expert. Easton recommended him personally. Said he was just checking the fields for new infestations. But your father," he started feeling ill, not long after. He couldn't focus, would forget basic things. The doctor said it was stress or old age. A tear slid down her cheek. "I could smell something strange on the grass outside the barn, not like normal weed killers. Stronger, almost metallic. The day your father collapsed, I tried to call an ambulance, but the phone lines were dead. By the time we got him to the clinic, he was delirious." Mary Ann dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice shaking. "Then that fire happened soon after. I just couldn't face it. I left. I'm sorry, Ellie. I left your father there when he needed me." Eli reached out, lightly touching her arm. "It's not your fault. Easton had everything rigged. My father was a target from the start." She nodded miserably. "Maybe so, but it was an evil smell. That pesticide. Just thinking about it makes me sick. Please be careful, child. They won't let you poke around unpunished." He squeezed her hand in gratitude, then took his leave. Outside, he inhaled the crisp air, mind spinning. Poison. A man claiming to spray fields had systematically poisoned John Walker, weakening him day by day. The blaze was just their final flourish. His father's earlier accident was no accident at all. That night, back in a half-collapsed storage barn he'd claimed as a covert shelter, Eli pinned scraps of paper to the wall with nails and string. A crude crime board took shape. Photos, newspaper clippings about suspected arson, deposit slips from Easton's shell company, the partial letter from the ranch's stove. He drew lines in chalk to connect people, places, and events. It was far from a polished investigation, but it gave him clarity. He looked over at Mustang, tethered in the corner, calmly munching hay from a makeshift trough. The horse's ears flicked in response to every tiny noise, testament to heightened instincts. Eli found solace in that unwavering presence. Then, standing before his improvised wall of evidence, he muttered, "Not random, not even the fire. This was all planned. Dad never stood a chance, but I'm still here." His gaze fell on the old revolver laid out on a crate. He picked it up, running a cloth along the barrel, checking each chamber. The act was methodical, reminiscent of how he'd maintained his rifle in the army. Satisfied, he slid the gun into a hip holster, feeling a steadiness in his breathing. If Easton believed the last Walker was beaten, he was dead wrong. The clue Mary Ann provided about a suspicious chemical lingered in Eli's mind. In the morning, he rode into a neighboring county, where an old friend of his father, Kyle Henderson, ran a small agricultural testing facility. The place was a simple prefab building surrounded by farmland, with a modest sign reading Henderson Crop Labs. Kyle appeared hesitant when Eli walked in. "Heard rumors you burned your own ranch," he said flatly, but the twitch in his eye revealed disbelief. Eli sighed. "What do you think?" Kyle shook his head. "John was my friend. I never believed that nonsense. What do you need?" Eli produced a small plastic bag containing withered grass and soil he'd scooped from near the barn's foundation. "I need tests done on this. Father was being poisoned by a pesticide. Maybe something not on the market." Nodding, Kyle took the sample behind a partition. An hour later, he emerged, face pale. "It's a banned compound called Red Rain. Hardly anyone would recognize it these days. Damages the liver if you're exposed over time. Fatal in high doses. The records for it are murky. Manufacturers claim it was never widely circulated." Eli's throat tightened. So the technician was slowly killing him, under the guise of spraying the fields. "That's my guess," Kyle whispered. "Look, if you want my help, I'll do what I can. But be careful. People who dig too deep around here vanish. Eli thanked him, pocketing the new evidence. He left with a fresh knot of anger in his chest, mixed with a spark of validation. Now he had the name of the poison, Red Rain. For John Walker, it was literally raining death on the fields he loved. Returning to the main town, he hoped to confront Sheriff Will Givens. As a younger man, Givens had served with John in the National Guard, and occasionally shared a beer with them at the ranch. If anyone might help, if only out of loyalty, it would be him. The sheriff's office was small, just a squat building near the county court. Inside, Givens slouched behind a desk, flipping through incident reports. At Eli's approach, he stiffened, glancing around as if worried about eavesdroppers. Eli dropped the test results onto the desk. "Look at this. Red Rain. They used it on my dad, likely on others. This is murder." Givens swallowed. "I don't know what you expect me to do, Walker. The DA won't even listen if all you've got is a soil test and the name of some outlaw pesticide." A flash of bitterness rose in Eli. "That's enough to start a real investigation, if you wanted to." The sheriff pushed the file away. "It's not that simple. I tried. The day your father died, I phoned some higher-ups. They told me to back off. Then Easton's men showed up with donations to the police fund. No one is going to hear me out if I speak up now." Eli's hand balled into a fist. "So you're fine with letting them get away with murder?" Givens wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm not fine with it, but I'm just one man. If you keep pushing, you'll drown and no one will be there to pull you up." The older man's resignation stung worse than outright denial. With a sneer of disgust, Eli snatched back the folder. "Then I guess I'm on my own," he stormed out, passing a row of scuffed chairs in the hallway. He caught a sideways glance from a deputy who immediately looked away. The entire place stank of fear. Outside, the sun glared cruelly. People on the street avoided his gaze. An elderly woman crossed to the other side as he approached. At the grocery store, where he tried buying a can of soup, the cashier muttered quietly, "Better leave town for good, Walker. You've stirred enough trouble. The big tree's fallen. There's no shade left for anyone under it." Eli offered no response, just paid for his soup and left. The suffocating hush of complicity weighed heavier than any desert heat. Yet with each snub, each fearful glance, his resolve only sharpened. One evening, a surge of impatience pushed Eli to act rashly. He had overheard that Ray Mercer, Easton's right-hand man, would be transporting farm supplies from a remote warehouse near the northern border. Under the cover of darkness, Eli saddled Mustang and tracked Mercer's SUV at a distance, staying behind with only starlight to guide him. The route led to an abandoned logging camp, complete with a wide metal building and no signage, perfect for illicit cargo. Hiding in a patch of scrub, Eli observed men unloading crates stamped with AG equipment. But from his vantage, he saw hazard symbols half scratched off. He took out an old smartphone to film the operation. Zooming in on Mercer shouting orders, the man smoked a cigarette, flicking ash near the crates as a forklift trundled by. It was a blatant secret, yet the best-kept one in this region. He was so engrossed in filming that he didn't notice a guard sneaking up from behind. A muzzle pressed into his lower back. "Don't move," a gruff voice ordered. Eli froze. The camera phone slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground. But even as he cursed himself for letting his guard down, a thunderous snort broke the stillness. Mustang had sensed trouble. The horse kicked a stack of crates with a loud crash, scaring the forklift driver, who swerved into a row of barrels. The guard pivoted momentarily, startled, giving Eli the split second he needed to spin around, knock the rifle aside, and land a sharp elbow to the man's jaw. Alarms shrieked. Floodlights snapped on, crisscrossing the yard. Eli rolled behind a pile of timber, heart pounding. Gunshots cracked the air. As men searched for him, Mustang neighed again, hooves pounding against the ground. Through the chaos, Eli spotted the horse gallop across the yard, drawing more attention. The forklift driver shouted and hopped out, leaving the engine running. Every guard scrambled in confusion. Eli took the chance to dart out, snatch his phone, and sprint for the tray line. One bullet zipped past, grazing bark. Another whizzed overhead. Then the pounding of the Mustang's hooves drew near. He managed to grab hold of its mane and swing himself up in a desperate move. They bolted through the forest, weaving between pines until the shouts and lights faded behind them. By the time they reached safety on a ridge, Eli's lungs burned as he dismounted. Mustang stood calmly, ears flicking as if to say, "That was close." Eli patted its flank. "You saved my life again," he murmured, voice still shaking with adrenaline. He retrieved the phone from his pocket. Miraculously, it wasn't shattered. Although the footage might be shaky, it was proof enough that AG equipment was a front for something lethal. He breathed heavily into the cold night, realizing he'd once again danced with death. But the infiltration confirmed a grim suspicion. Easton was trafficking dangerous chemicals. If they'd used red rain to poison his father, they could do it to anyone. The only question was how many more had to die before they were stopped. Later, seated by a modest campfire in the rocky foothills, Eli let the horror of it all wash over him. The slow burn of resentment smoldered into a fierce blaze of righteous anger. Mustang stood behind him, half silhouetted by firelight. Ears perked, Eli pressed a palm to his temple, feeling the weariness of the night's ordeal. Then, with an almost hollow voice, he confessed to the darkness. They murdered him in increments. The blaze was just their final stage. He recalled the way John's voice trembled on the recording, the rumors of doctors diagnosing him with old age while toxins ravaged his system. The knowledge twisted in his gut. "I should have been here," he muttered, teeth clenched. "I left him alone." He took out the old revolver, that battered heirloom of the Walker men. Ever since the war, firearms had been routine tools for him. But tonight, each chamber he checked felt like a vow sealed in metal and gunpowder. He flicked his gaze at Mustang, who watched him with an uncanny stillness. The flames danced in the horse's eyes, reflecting both challenge and solidarity. "All right," he whispered. "It's time we fight back." In that hush, the only response was the crackle of burning twigs. But the silent presence of the black Mustang felt like an agreement stronger than words. Eli's convictions were clear. Now he needed allies. A single man, even with a loyal horse, stood little chance against an entrenched cartel armed with wealth and soldiers. That realization led him into the high mountains where rumor had it Eric Stone lived. Eric was a former sniper who had once lost everything to Easton's expansion. If half the stories were true, Eric was a recluse, angry at the world, equally comfortable behind a rifle scope as he was behind locked doors. The cabin, perched atop a steep ridge, was accessible only by a winding footpath. Eli's shoulders tensed as he neared, half expecting a warning shot. Sure enough, a voice rang out. "That's far enough." The man's silhouette, leaning from a second-floor window, held a rifle aimed with chilling ease. "State your purpose or get lost." "I'm Eli Walker," he called back, heart hammering. "My father was John Walker." A pause, then the rifle lifted slightly. "Don't come any closer. This name check doesn't earn you a free pass." "What do you want?" Drawing a shaky breath, Eli recounted in brief what had happened. How the ranch burned, how Easton was behind it, how John had discovered damning evidence. He played a snippet of John's recorded voice on his phone. Silence from above. Then Eric's face appeared at the cabin entrance, scruffy beard and hollow cheeks, revealing years of bitterness. "Fine, come in," he said begrudgingly, "but keep your hand off that sidearm." Inside the cabin was a Spartan arrangement of weapons, survival gear, and a single battered armchair. A wood stove crackled in the corner. Mustang, left outside, nickered softly, seemingly anxious about letting Eli go alone. Eric gestured for him to sit, then without preamble asked, "So you want me to fight a cartel on your behalf? You realize I tried that path once. They took my land, threatened my sister. I ended up here, the town maniac who stares down a rifle scope all day." Eli steeled himself. "I don't expect you to do everything alone, but I need your skills. They killed my father. I have proof. We can't let them keep devouring everything." Eric looked at the phone again. Hearing John's voice, he shut his eyes. "I remember your dad. He once let me stay in his barn after they torched my place. I owe him, I guess." He spat into the fire. "All right, Walker. I'll help. But don't expect me to stand on the front line. I'll be your eyes and your trigger at range. Nothing more." Relief washed over Eli. "That's more than I could ask." Eric nodded grimly. And so the first ally was won. The next recruit came via an unexpected introduction. Sky Alder reappeared, guiding Eli to a hidden canyon. There they met Colt Grey Wolf, a native tracker rumored to be an expert at navigating uncharted trails. Colt stood near a roaring creek, arms folded. He had quiet eyes that spoke of deep loss. After hearing the story, Colt said, "My younger brother owed them money. They took him. I never saw him again. The cops wrote it off as a runaway. I know better." His gaze drifted to the black Mustang behind Eli. The horse stared back, unblinking. Colt's expression shifted, reverence mingling with sorrow. The elders speak of a spirit horse that appears when a soul is in crisis. Maybe this is that. I won't walk with another man, but I'll follow the horse. Eli suppressed a bitter laugh. The horse might be the better half of me anyway. Colt simply gave a curt nod, as if that explained everything. Another ally joined the cause. Finally, an unexpected lead from Walter Brooks guided Eli to Emily Ramirez, a former military intelligence officer with rumored hacking prowess. She lived under the unassuming guise of a printer repair tech in a rundown strip mall. Meeting her required a cloak and dagger approach. Late at night, a discreet knock on a back door. She answered with a skeptical glare. "You got about 3 seconds to sell me on why I shouldn't slam this door," she snapped, arms folded across a worn hoodie. Eli handed her a phone loaded with the covert warehouse footage. "That's a snippet of a cartel shipment near the border. I need a digital ghost to gather intel from their communications." Walter said, "You're the best." She frowned, scanning a few frames. "They're using old frequencies, probably easy to jam. Not sure I want to wade into that mess. The last time I stuck my nose where it didn't belong. The army booted me." He showed her a short clip from his phone. Mustang galloping through a half-collapsed trap to save him. Her lips parted in intrigue. "That's your horse?" "Something like that," Eli replied. "He's saved my skin more than once." A tiny grin tugged at her mouth. "I like horses, and I hate men who wear too much gel in their hair while they run around in black SUVs. Fine, I'll help." She extended a hand. "I'm Emily." So the circle was complete. The sniper with a vendetta, the native tracker with an unerring sense of terrain, the hacker with contempt for authority, and the ex-soldier who refused to let his father's murder go unpunished. Over the coming days, they converged in a discreet, abandoned warehouse near a rocky canyon. The battered walls provided privacy from prying eyes, and the area was remote enough that few ventured there. Inside, they set up what meager supplies they had: a rickety table for laptops and phone gear, a corner for firearms cleaning, and a pile of bedrolls stashed out of sight. One evening, as the group gathered under the single overhead light, Eli scratched a rough plan on a piece of plywood. Eric hovered behind him, arms folded. Colt leaned against a wooden post, silent as always, scanning the perimeter. Emily typed furiously on a laptop, bouncing signals across various channels to intercept the cartel's phone traffic. Mustang waited outside, occasionally poking its muzzle through the door. "All right," Eli began, voice firm. "We know Easton's men are shipping red rain and other contraband under the guise of farm supplies. We have video. We have my father's records on the forged deeds. Next step is to disrupt them, gather more solid proof, and feed it to the press or law enforcement outside Easton's reach." Emily cast a sidelong glance at him. "That's risky. If we blow up a cartel's operation, they'll come after us with everything they've got. We can't just sit here," Eric growled. "I've lived in fear for a decade." "That ends now," Colt merely said. "When we strike, we must do it quickly. From the shadows, disappear before they can track us." Nodding, Eli turned to the horse silhouette stenciled on the door. He'd burned the shape in charcoal, a black Mustang rearing, symbolic of the silent rebellion they were launching. "We hide in the canyons, strike at their warehouses, and vanish. Emily, you intercept calls and misdirect them. Eric, you watch from vantage points. Pick off any guards if we're cornered. Colt, you guide the infiltration. I'll handle direct confrontation with whoever leads the operation on site." As they finalized plans, Eli's mind wandered briefly to the ranch, to the father who had once taught him how to fix a fence or ride a horse. If only John could see him now, forging a small resistance in the name of justice. He pictured the final lines of the half-burned letter. "If I can't get this to Eli." That half-sentence had become the catalyst of everything. John might never know, but his legacy lived on in the fight. At last, the group dispersed to rest or perform individual tasks. Eric cleaned his sniper rifle in a corner. Colt sharpened a hunting knife by the door. Emily typed away at encrypted chat rooms to find safe ally. Eli stepped outside to find Mustang standing in the moonlight, tail swishing at invisible flies. He pressed a palm to the horse's muscled shoulder. "You're the symbol of all this," he murmured. "They burned my home, but they can't burn this land's spirit. As long as you roam free, we have hope." The Mustang exhaled, rustling Eli's hair with its breath. A quiet camaraderie passed between them, forged from adversity. Once Eli would have scoffed at the idea that an animal could be a beacon of strength, but the line between man and myth had blurred for him ever since the night he nearly died in the desert. Sometimes, the only language that made sense was the silent, resolute acceptance of a creature that refused to be tamed. "Tomorrow," he told the horse, running a gentle hand along its neck. "Tomorrow, we strike back." Above them, the stars sprawled across the sky, an indifferent tapestry to the struggles below. But in that abandoned warehouse at the rim of a dusty canyon, a small band of outcasts stood ready to defy an entire cartel. They would do so in stealth, fueled by revenge, guided by an unbreakable Mustang spirit, and bound by a vow to honor the blood spilled on Walker land. A cool pre-dawn haze hung over the rocky landscape near Rattlesnake Gorge, turning the craggy formations into looming silhouette. Eli Walker surveyed the horizon from the saddle of his black Mustang, heart thudding with anticipation. In the distance stood a seemingly ordinary ranch, a modest spread, marked by faded livestock pens and a makeshift sign that read, "Two Pines Cattle." Yet Emily's hacking had exposed it as a front for the cartel's latest operation, a hidden freight hub used to funnel hazardous chemicals under the guise of livestock feed. Eli glanced at Colt Greywolf standing beside him on a rocky outcrop. Colt's expression was impassive, but his eyes glinted with a mixture of tension and resolve. He'd scouted the area the previous night, confirming that the place was, in fact, the skeleton of an abandoned quarry ringed by canyon walls. Perfect for clandestine dealings, perfect for the cartel. About 50 yards behind them, hidden behind stunted pines, Eric Stone lay prone on a slight rise. Through the scope of his custom rifle, he watched every angle of the compound. Emily Ramirez was tucked under a camouflage tarp near him, operating a laptop that fed her real-time data from compromised security feeds. Their plan hinged on the element of surprise, and on Emily's ability to scramble the ranch's cameras for precisely 8 minutes. Eli patted the Mustang's neck and whispered, soon feeling the stallion shift beneath him, muscles taut. It was as though the horse sensed the tension in the air, a tension that thrummed with the promise of conflict. They were about to make a bold statement, not just for themselves, but for the entire region that Easton's cartel had terrorized for too long. "All clear so far." Emily's voice crackled through a small earpiece. 4 men visible in the yard, 2 near the loading zone, 2 circling what looks like an office trailer. Eli swallowed, recalling the pain of losing his father, the betrayal of the local authorities, and the silent agony of watching an entire town cower under Easton's shadow, steeling himself. He pressed a finger to his ear. "Start the scramble on my signal." He nudged the Mustang forward, Colt jogging quietly at his side. They made their way down a winding, sandy path that led to the compound's perimeter. Here, a rusty fence and a half-collapsed gate barred entrance. Colt knelt behind a stack of hay bales left to rot, gesturing for Eli to keep going. This was the moment. Emily's digital assault began. "Camera feed down," Emily murmured. "Clock starts now." A faint hum told Eli she'd unleashed her signal, jamming software, giving them 8 precious minutes to strike. Heart pounding, he nodded at Colt, then guided the Mustang toward a gap in the fence. The horse stepped through without hesitation, hooves crunching quietly on gravel. About 30 yards ahead loomed a corrugated metal warehouse, presumably where the cartel stored its precious cargo, boxes of contraband labeled as fertilizer or cattle feed, but containing the deadly red rain and other illegal toxins. They decided on a pincer tactic. While Eric provided overwatch from high ground, and Emily jammed the cameras, Eli and Colt would infiltrate the warehouse itself. Meanwhile, the Mustang had a different role: cause a ruckus, misdirect any guards who might note. At Colt's signal, Eli slipped off the horse and handed him the rope reins. "If we run into trouble inside, get out of range and regroup," Eli whispered. Colt inclined his head, then tugged on the rope, leading the Mustang along the side of the building. They reached a narrow corridor formed by stacked crates. At Colt's soft click of his tongue, the horse lifted its hoof and pawed at the metal siding, producing a rhythmic banging noise that echoed through the yard. Two men in black jackets spun around, peering into the gloom. "What the hell's that?" one of them muttered, stepping closer. "Coyote? Maybe," the other guessed. Eric seized the moment from his vantage, firing a silent round that struck a floodlight overhead, plunging the corridor into deeper shadow. Confused, the men aimed flashlights around, but the glare simply reflected off the warehouse's corrugated surface. By the time they moved to investigate, Colt had circled behind them, silent as a ghost, leaving the corridor clear for Eli to proceed. Eli crept forward, hugging the metal wall until he reached a side door. He produced a small crowbar, jammed it beneath the padlock, and applied just enough force to snap the shackle. A faint squeak of twisted metal was all the noise it made. Carefully, he pulled the door open. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating rows of barrels and wooden crates. The place smelled of chemicals and dust. Shadows danced on the walls from overhead fans. According to Emily's intel, these barrels were a fresh batch, newly arrived from across the border. This was the very lifeblood of Easton's operation, fueling the toxic monopoly he sought to expand. He checked his watch, less than 5 minutes left on the camera scramble. No time to waste. He signaled Colt, who rushed in behind him, scanning with a small flashlight. Each labeled container read Agro X94, or fertilizer base. But the faint whiff told Eli it was all a cover. This was red rain or something even worse. "Over here," Colt murmured, pointing to a row of locked steel cabinets, possibly documents, shipping manifests, or digital backups. Bing! Outside, the Mustang continued its roll, banging on random walls, forcing the guards to chase phantom noises. Emily let out a soft whoop in Eli's earpiece. "You've got 'em running in circles. 3 minutes left." Though nodding, Eli found a robust padlock on one cabinet. With the crowbar, he pried it open. Inside lay a slim metal case. He slid it out and flipped the latches. A quick glance revealed an external hard drive, plus stacks of paper, transaction records with times, dates, and coded references. The jackpot. He stuffed them all into a weatherproof bag. Meanwhile, Colt rummaged through a chest in the corner. Grim-faced, 4 barrels labeled RR21, at least. "We can't let them keep that. It's the same stuff that killed your father." Eli took a breath. "We destroy what we can. Enough to set them back, show we're not just rumor. Then we get out." Working fast, they set small charges that Eric had provided, homemade incendiaries with a short fuse. As they prepared to leave, Eli pulled out a small GoPro camera from his pouch and carefully attached it to the Mustang's halter. He whispered in the horse's ear, "Time for your spotlight, old friend." Colt gave a short, low whistle, prompting the Mustang to trot into an adjacent holding pen. In a dramatic scene, the horse reared, smashing open a flimsy barrier stacked with crates. Barrels tumbled, chemicals spilled, and the sound reverberated through the warehouse. A guard rushed inside, eyes wide at the sight of a massive black horse in full frenzy. "What the?" the guard shouted, only to be knocked off his feet when the horse kicked a crate into his path. Another guard dropped his gun in panic, retreating as the Mustang snorted and slammed its hooves. The camera footage would be spectacular, an unstoppable animal turning the cartel's nerve center into chaos. At that moment, Emily's voice hissed, "Time's up. I can't hold the feed any longer." Instantly, sirens wailed, floodlights snapped on, and the entire facility roared to life with frantic shouting. "Go, go, go," Eli shouted to Colt. They dashed out the side door just as cartel reinforcements rushed in from the yard. Eric covered them with sniper fire, precise shots that shattered spotlights and pinned down any pursuers. Colt whistled again, and the Mustang galloped through the now splintered fence line, fluid and Eli could barely catch his breath as they regrouped behind a storage container near the perimeter. The small incendiary charges exploded inside the warehouse, sending up flares of orange flame and billowing smoke. Shouts escalated into chaos, overshadowed by the crackle of ignited chemical. "Mount up," Colt signaled. They raced for a safe route out of the compound. The Mustang bounded ahead, each powerful stride carrying them further from the pandemonium. Within minutes, the entire group had vanished into the night, leaving behind scorched crates, a half-destroyed stash of red rain, and stolen digital evidence that would soon rock the view of Easton's legitimate empire. By dawn, Emily had edited the footage into a short, explosive clip featuring the Black Mustang's rampage. She posted it anonymously to various social media sites, embedding it with hashtags like Your Ghost of Bitterroot and Ranch Revenge. The response was staggering. Within a single day, the video racked up over 1.5 million views. Local news outlets began sniffing around for the truth behind the bizarre images of a wild horse attacking a cartel warehouse, and soon whispers of Charles Easton's shady dealings grew louder. Unfortunately, the success was two-edged. Ray Mercer, Easton's right hand, wasted no time unleashing a manhunt. A phone call snapped through a burner line. Don't bother following them anymore. Kill them now, the official word was out. The cartel wanted Eli Walker's head on a plate, and anyone allied with him. It started with a frantic message that lit up Emily's phone late one evening. A supposed relative of hers, one she hadn't spoken to in years, was allegedly being harassed by suspicious men. "They're watching my plate." The text read. Fear pulsed in every word. Without pausing to verify, Emily grabbed her jacket and dashed off, ignoring Eli's warnings to wait. She never reached her destination. Colt Grey Wolf, recognizing the setup from a series of subtle red flags, tailed her at a distance. His instincts proved correct. Emily walked right into an ambush in a deserted parking lot behind an old diner. The moment she got out of her car, headlights blazed, revealing half a dozen armed men stepping from the shadows. A scuffle broke out, shouts echoing off the empty building. Colt dived in, shoving Emily out of harm's way. Gunfire crackled, bullets ricocheting off dumpsters and brick walls. Two of the gunmen fell to Colt's swift marksmanship, but in the chaos, three more managed to overpower him. Emily sprawled behind a rusted barrel, watched helplessly as they dragged Colt into a black SUV and sped away. Later that night, a text arrived on Eli's phone from an unknown number. It included a video clip, Ray Mercer's face close to the camera, the harsh glow of headlights behind him. Colt was on his knees, arms bound, a bloody gash above his eyebrow. "Want your friend alive." Mercer's voice rasped. "Show up at Bald Rock before sundown tomorrow. Come alone, Walker, and don't you dare bring that demon horse." The message ended with a sardonic grin. That grin chilled Eli's blood more than any threat of violence. It was a smug confidence that he had the upper hand at last. Morning came with a quiet tension in the makeshift hideout. Emily was beside herself with guilt, pacing the dusty floor. Eric Stone sat at a table, assembling a new scope on his rifle. He had only one question: we going in guns blazing or what? Eli massaged the bandage around his shoulder, a leftover wound from the prior raid. "We can't walk into a trap without a plan. Colt wouldn't want us all dead." He looked at Emily, who was on the verge of tears, "and we can't let them use him as bait." She nodded, biting her lips so hard it nearly drew blood. "I swear I'll do anything to fix this. If he dies, it's on me." Eric cleared his throat. "Mercer said you're to come alone, with no horse. That's your call. But it's obviously a setup." Eli grabbed a worn baseball cap, pulling it low over his brow. "I have to go, but alone doesn't have to mean unprotected." He glanced at Emily. "Keep eyes on the perimeter. Cut their communications if possible. Eric, I need you on overwatch." The plan was hastily laid out. While Eli followed the instructions, Emily would attempt to jam any exit routes for the cartel's vehicles, and Eric would find a vantage point to pick off hostiles. They prayed it would be enough to get Colt out alive. Bald Rock was a notorious stretch of rocky badlands, dotted with treacherous pits and hidden sinkholes. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Eli trudged across the uneven ground alone, an M1911 pistol strapped under his jacket. The sting in his shoulder reminded him of how vulnerable he was. He'd left the Mustang tied up miles away, which pained him more than he expected. Somehow the horse had become his anchor. Now he faced Mercer on foot. 100 yards ahead rose an outcrop shaped like a giant fang. At its base, Ray Mercer waited with half a dozen men, Colt bound and gagged at their feet. No other vehicles were visible, but the oppressive silence suggested snipers or traps. Indeed, from behind a jagged boulder, a faint glint of metal indicated a rifle scope. likely aimed at Eli. Mercer lit a cigarette, tossing the match onto the dusty ground. Walker, I knew you'd show up. Your father had that same pig-headed loyalty. Eli didn't take the bait. Let Colt go. Mercer exhaled smoke through his nostrils. Why would I do that? You've caused me enough headaches, burning my boss's warehouses, filming your little black horse carnival. I think it's time to put an end to the Walker name. Eli scanned his surroundings, looking for any sign of Eric's overwatch. None. He took a step forward. You kill me, Easton still faces a storm of evidence. The footage is out there. The feds are sniffing around. Another body won't save you. Mercer snickered. We'll see. He snapped his fingers, and the men fanned out, leading Colt to the side, near a rocky edge that dropped into a deep ravine. Here's the deal. You hand over everything. Videos, records, the hardware you stole. Then maybe I let your friend walk away. But you don't get to walk away. Not after everything you did. Eli forced a laugh. I didn't bring a box of evidence with me. You idiot. You think I'd come here loaded down? Fury flickered in Mercer's eyes. He nodded at one of his men. Search him. A large thug advanced, patted Eli down roughly. The thug discovered only the sidearm. He's clean. Just a pistol. Mercer took that pistol, twirling it with a theatrical flourish. Well, well. You never learn, do you, soldier boy? At that moment, a faint chirp in Eli's earpiece. Eric's signal. Sniper on your 3, another at your 9. Eli locked eyes with Colt, whose expression read both relief and silent warning. With a calm exhale, Eli lunged forward, tackling the big thug who'd frisked him. Shouts rang out. Gunshots cracked. One bullet tore through Eli's left shoulder, sending waves of agony coursing through him. He tumbled, rolling behind a rock. All around, chaos erupted. From a distant ridge, Eric fired methodically, each shot echoing across the rocky gulch. One sniper's rifle clattered away, a fatal shot to the chest. Another man screamed, dropping his gun. In the confusion, Colt managed to break free from the man holding his restraints, though a swift punch to his stomach left him gasping for air. Kill them, Mercer roared, ducking behind a slab of limestone. He fired wild shots in Eric's direction, forcing the sniper to shift position. Eli, blood soaking his jacket, crawled across the stony ground. His vision blurred from pain, but he forced himself to reach Colt, who had slumped against a boulder. They locked arms, supporting each other. A new volley of gunfire pinned them down, ricochets sparking off the rock. Dust filled the air, stinging their eyes. When it seemed hopeless, an unmistakable neigh cut through the chaos. Eli jerked his head up in disbelief. The black Mustang was here, charging along a ridge behind the cartel's line. Emily must have loosed the horse, or maybe it broke free on its own. Whatever the reason, the massive stallion burst onto the scene like a tempest, prancing and kicking up stones that rained down on 2 unsuspecting gunmen. Mercer swore, pivoting to fire at the horse, but the Mustang veered away with a nimble dodge, hooves clattering across the slope. Then, from above, a tumble of rocks collapsed onto the narrow path, triggered by the horse's thudding steps. Boulders thundered down, scattering the cartel men in a frantic scramble. Eli seized the opening, ignoring the searing pain. He gripped Colt's arm and hustled them both out from under the crossfire. Bullets whizzed overhead, but the rolling debris forced Mercer's men to break formation. Eric took advantage, picking off another attacker with a single well-placed shot. A cursing Mercer crawled out from behind a shattered ledge, his hair matted with dust. He snapped off a few more shots, but the Mustang, unstoppable, charged downhill. 3 men went flying as the stallion pummeled them with its forelegs, then swung its hindquarters in a savage kick. One gunman tumbled into a crevice, screaming. The rest fled. Morale shattered. Fall back, Mercer shouted, face twisted with panic. A moment later, he too vanished behind a swirl of dust and rocks. The last echo of footsteps faded as the remaining men retreated. Easton might not be pleased, but they had no stomach left for this fight. Gasping, Eli nearly collapsed. Colt bore his weight, though he himself was bruised and battered. The Mustang trotted up, breath heaving, eyes wide with adrenaline. Gently, the horse lowered its head, as though checking if Eli still lived. Good boy, Eli rasped, tears stinging his eyes from the mix of pain and gratitude. You saved me again. Moments later, Eric emerged from the gloom, rifle slung over his shoulder. Emily arrived too, having scrambled down from a vantage point in time to see the final moments. Colt, struggling to keep his own balance, offered a tight smile. "We need to get out of here before they regroup." Somehow they made their way back to their hidden vehicle. Eli bled heavily, consciousness slipping. The Mustang followed them faithfully, refusing to leave. By the time they reached the safe house, Eli was half delirious with fever. Emily tore at the first aid kit, fighting to stanch the wound. Eric scowled, thinking of how close they'd come to losing another friend. Colt paced, blaming himself for being captured in the first place. But as the group huddled around a battered cot, it was clear they'd survived the cartel's trap. And the Mustang's dramatic intervention had carved another story into the region's lore. The flame of resistance still burned, if only by a thread. 2 days passed in a blur of fever dreams and frantic care. Eli lay on the cot, drifting between lucid intervals and haunting nightmares. He dreamt of his father's ranch, smoldering embers in the moonlight. He saw the Mustang galloping through a crimson sky. He heard John Walker's voice telling him to stand firm. Each time he woke, he found Emily or Colt changing his bandages, Eric prepping supplies, or the Mustang grazing quietly outside. Eventually, his fever broke. He sat up, wincing at the pain that flared across his shoulder. In that moment, he felt different, calmer, more resolute. The raw anger that once fueled him had settled into a cold, unwavering determination. That same morning, Emily typed furiously on her laptop. Through a network of encrypted channels, she'd reached out to local groups and individuals who had suffered at Easton's hands. Families evicted from their land, workers forced into near-slavery conditions, and a few disillusioned cops who'd watched the corruption spread They responded with interest, hope, and a willingness to fight back. Word of the Black Mustang's heroic feats had spread like wildfire, igniting a strange sense of unity among the downtrodden. Colt, stoic as always, laid out a large map of the region on a rickety table. With a pencil, he drew 3 routes the cartel used to transport chemicals, based on all the infiltration and intel they'd gathered. "If we can cut off these supply lines simultaneously," he explained, "we hit them where it hurts. We also cause confusion. They won't know which path to defend." Eric, cleaning his sniper rifle with methodical care, smirked. "I have some leftover gifts from a buddy in the service. Claymore mines, repurposed from the Gulf War era. They're old, but they'll still blow a few trucks sky high." Eli, still pale but sitting upright, nodded. "We coordinate an all-out strike. This is it. Either we break Easton's cartel, or we'll die trying." He looked at Emily. Any luck roping in more than just a handful of outraged neighbors? She tapped a final key and spun the laptop around. Names scrolled across the screen. Former employees of Easton's front companies, relatives of those who'd vanished under suspicious circumstances, and even a junior deputy who had watched his partner get bought off. These folks are tired of living under the heel. They're ready to join up if we can offer a chance at success. Eli's gaze drifted to the Mustang out the window. "Then we give them that chance." They spent the remainder of the day hashing out the detail. Under the cloak of a moonless night, small squads of volunteers would position themselves along the 3 main transport routes. Emily would sever the cartel's communications, preventing them from calling reinforcement. Eric would plant his claymores along the roads leading to Easton's major processing plant, the same property that used to be the Walker Ranch before it was burned and repurposed. Colt would lead a group to sabotage any secondary routes. Eli himself insisted on spearheading the direct assault. "The ranch is mine," he declared softly, fists clenched. "I'm taking it back or I'll die on that land just like my father." No one argued. They recognized it was personal, and they also knew that the sight of Eli atop his black Mustang, storming the gates of the stolen ranch, would become a rallying image for everyone who had lost hope. The tension was electric as they prepared. Guns were cleaned, gear packed. Emily laid out a series of digital timers for controlling the Claymore mines. She also rigged a portable jamming device to block the cartel's cameras for a crucial window. Meanwhile, the volunteers arrived in trickles, grizzled farmhands, a few disaffected police officers, even a local mechanic who brought homemade barricades to block the roads. They crowded the abandoned warehouse that served as the rebels' hideout, forging an improvised militia, fueled by anger, desperation, and a fierce longing for justice. Night came swiftly. the sky clouded and starless, as though mourning the bloodshed about to unfold. Eli donned a worn bulletproof vest. He checked the magazine of his father's old revolver, then slid it into a thigh holster. A younger volunteer approached, offering him a modern assault rifle. Eli hesitated, then took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." The younger man swallowed, eyes lit with the awe of meeting a local legend. Word had traveled fast about the ghost Mustang, and this man wanted to be part of that story. Eric snapped on a night vision scope. Cole double-checked a canteen. Emily shut her laptop, the final pieces of her infiltration code locked in. Outside, the Mustang snorted, stamping the ground. Eli whispered to the horse, "It's time." Shortly before 3 a.m., the operation began. In 3 separate thrusts, groups of volunteers moved out, stealthily placing barricades and claymores on critical roads, intercepting any cartel vehicles en route. Emily sat near a portable antenna station, launching her jamming protocols, her face grimly lit by the screen's glow. Eric perched atop a loading crane left behind from an old construction site, providing sniper cover from half a mile away. Eli, with a small band of the bravest volunteers, approached the main gates of what was once the Walker Ranch, now Easton's primary red rain processing facility. Spotlights swept across chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Guards patrolled in pairs, weapons at the ready. From behind a cluster of abandoned sheds, Eli and his team gathered. The Mustang waited beside him. No bridle or saddle, only a simple rope harness to guide it. Eli caught the faint reflection of his face in a rusted mirror. He hardly recognized the man he'd become, haggard, eyes hardened by heartbreak and battles. But there was also a flicker of hope. "Let's do this," he said softly. He swung onto the Mustang's. The horse stepped forward, nostrils flaring. The plan was simple. Emily would cut the compound's power and camera feeds for exactly 3 minutes. That window would allow Eli and his team to smash through the front gate without being mowed down by automated turrets or triggered alarm. Then they'd push inside, sabotage the chemical vats, and let the volunteer militia flood in. The signal came from Emily's earpiece. Power down in 3, 2, 1. Darkness cloaked the compound as lights flickered and died. Alarms stuttered. The hum of electric fences ceased. "Go, go, go," a volunteer hissed. With a powerful jolt, the Mustang surged forward, smashing into the chain-link gate. The metal buckled under the impact and the combined leverage of 3 volunteers prying it open. Shots rang out from startled guards, muzzle flashes streaking through the darkness. Eli returned fire from atop the horse, each recoil pounding his still tender shoulder. But adrenaline drowned the pain. He guided the Mustang deeper inside, flanked by volunteers who lobbed smoke grenades to further confuse the defender. When lights flickered back on a few seconds later, chaos erupted. Guns blazed. Men shouted contradictory orders. The sight of a black horse bounding through the yard in the middle of gunfire stunned many. Some froze. Others fired blindly, hitting barrels and equipment. Gasoline spilled, drenching the ground. The stench of chemicals soon mingled with cordite. Eric took advantage, picking off any guard who aimed at Eli. High on his crane, invisible in the night, the sniper rained hell with measured precision. Meanwhile, Emily's sabotage of the security systems caused random shutters to slam down, trapping cartel gunmen inside corridors. The volunteer militia poured in behind Eli, outraged locals seeking to free themselves from Easton's tyranny. Inside a large metal building, swirling red lights revealed huge tanks labeled RR-21, the dreaded Red Rain formula. If those tanks went up in flames, the entire facility might blow sky high, but they had no choice. Smashed lines, bullet holes, and strategic charges planted by the rebels spelled the end for Easton's toxic operation. The roar of an explosion tore through the air as one tank ruptured, spewing a chemical-laced inferno. Eli shielded his face from the searing heat. The Mustang whinnied, stomping anxiously at the flames. Still, they pressed on. Guards retreated in disarray, some throwing down their weapons and fleeing the yard. Others fought bitterly. On the far side of the building, Colt led another group, using bolt cutters to free terrified migrant workers. The cartel had coerced into labor. Gunfire crackled constantly, forming a deafening backdrop. Soon, the main yard was littered with smoking wreckage and toppled guards. Over 100 volunteers and ex-laborers now controlled the perimeter. Eli rode through the blackened remains of what had once been his family's farmland. He choked up at the memory of simpler days. Then movement caught his eye. Ray Mercer, battered and limping, racing for a waiting SUV near the collapsed barn. Without hesitation, Eli spurred the Mustang, cutting off Mercer's path. The man tried firing at close range, but the Mustang reared and knocked the gun aside. Mercer tripped, landing heavily. "Get away from me," he cried, clutching his injured leg. Eli leveled his father's revolver. "You made a grave mistake messing with the Walker family." Mercer's mouth opened, trembling. Before he could reply, a battered truck screeched in, nearly crushing him. Charles Easton himself stumbled out, flanked by 2 bodyguards. The industrialist wore an immaculate suit. Incongruous against the fiery backdrop, panic etched his face. "You," Easton snarled at Eli. "You have no idea what you've done. These deals, these chemicals, they were going to revolutionize murder and poison." Eli spat, finger tightening on the trigger. Before Easton could draw, the Mustang lashed out with a savage kick to Easton's chest, knocking the man flat on his back. Gasps arose from onlookers. Easton lay there, wheezing. The wind knocked clean out of him. The horse let out a snort, as if punctuating the final blow. Shouts signaled the last wave of Cartel loyalists collapsing under the combined assault. One by one, they surrendered to the swarm of volunteers. Some pleaded for mercy, others tried to crawl away. The air reeked of burnt chemicals, smoke coiling into the sky. Yet an overwhelming sense of liberation coursed through those gathered. They had done the unthinkable, taken back the Walker Ranch from a powerful cartel, shining a light on the black market dealings that had terrorized the region. Sometime near dawn, sirens echoed in the distance. Federal agents and state troopers arrived to find the compound in tatters, Easton and his henchmen bound, and 100-strong crowd of armed locals demanding justice. Body cameras and phone footage documented every detail of the final confrontation, leaving little room for Easton's lawyers to spin the narrative. Boxes of damning paperwork, along with Emily's digital records, were turned over to the authorities. Eli lingered on the ranch's southern field, stroking the Mustang's mane in weary silence. A few townspeople tried to hail him as a hero. He accepted their thanks with a sad smile, but said little. The war might be over, but the scars it left behind were deep. Within hours, the place was overrun with investigators, journalists, and shell-shocked townsfolk. Realizing he'd become the reluctant center of an unfolding national story, Eli quietly arranged to slip away. He entrusted Eric, Emily, and Colt with the details of the handoff, ensuring the evidence reached the right agencies, and that local farmers could reclaim the land stolen from them. Then, with his shoulder freshly bandaged, he mounted the black Mustang one last time. Word spread among the volunteers that Eli was leaving. Some ran up, urging him to stay, to help rebuild, to become the face of a new era, but he only shook his head. "I did what I had to do," he murmured. "The real rebuilding belongs to you all. I'm just a soldier who came home to find his place destroyed, and that fight's done now." He handed Emily a worn folder containing legal documents that Walter Brooks had compiled before going into hiding. "Use this to help the families that lost everything, and don't let Easton's men hide behind new masks." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "What about you, Eli?" He paused, glancing around the yard, scorched, smoky, yet filled with the promise of a fresh start. He remembered the day he first stepped off the bus, the day he discovered his father was gone. So much had happened since. "I'm not sure," he admitted softly. "Somewhere out there, there's a place for me." The Mustang shifted beneath him. As if nudging him onward, he smiled, giving one last wave to Eric, Colt, and the others who had fought beside him. "You all keep the flame of freedom alive," he said, voice husky with emotion. "And if you ever see a black horse on the horizon, maybe that'll be me, checking in." With that, he spurred the Mustang forward. The powerful stallion took off across the ruined field. Onlookers watched, breath held, as he vanished into the dawn's pale light. Dust rose in his wake, swirling in the growing glow of the rising sun. Weeks later, the dust of conflict settled over Bitterroot County. Federal agents dismantled Easton's empire, uncovering the labyrinth of fake deeds, chemical smuggling routes, and bank accounts stuffed with blood money. Emily, Eric, and Colt became community leaders of sorts, teaching survival skills, self-defense, and digital literacy to prevent any future tyranny from taking root. They set up a small training school near the edge of town, turning an abandoned barn into a hub of local resilience. An untouched stretch of land behind the reclaimed ranch remained wild and open, protected by collective agreement. Folks called it the horse's shadow, or hoofprint field, leaving it free of development. Some evenings at the edge of twilight, a few locals swore they saw a lone black Mustang grazing among the tall grass. They'd whisper about the ghost of Bitterroot, remembering the impossible footage of a horse charging a cartel operation under gunfire. Whispered legends grew. They say if this land ever falls into darkness again, the horse will return, bearing a rider with nothing left to lose, a soldier who once fought for his family's honor. In the hush of those stories, the memory of Eli Walker endured, a man who lost everything, only to rise from the ashes guided by the spirit of a wild Mustang. Though no one knew where he had gone, the faint hoofbeats of his tail echoed across the plains and canyons, a testament that sometimes, even in a world consumed by greed and violence, a single man and a single horse could spark a revolution that refused to be tamed. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out, hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. Reed Calloway stood before the ashes, boots sinking into scorched soil. He didn't curse. He didn't cry. He just listened and heard hooves in the distance. The townsfolk didn't speak when Stormheart arrived. They simply parted, like pilgrims before something sacred. Deputy Marin held the brim of her hat, stunned. You said the horse vanished years ago. Reed nodded. And yet here he is, just when we've lost everything. Reed reached out, not to tame, not to claim, just to thank. Stormheart lowered his head, and in that quiet gesture, the healing began. Reed Calloway stood before the ashes, boots sinking into scorched soil. He didn't curse. He didn't cry. He just listened and heard hooves in the distance. Dr. Rowan traced the scars across Stormheart's flank. This Mustang has lived through war, not just wilderness, but something deeper. Deputy Marin held the brim of her hat, stunned. You said the horse vanished years ago. Reed nodded. And yet here he is, just when we've lost everything.